The fire crackled and sputtered. Legolas looked back at the camp and the sleeping man. He couldn't believe he had rescued the human. Feelings of guilt edged his thoughts as he remembered wanting to leave the young man and let him suffer the consequences of his foolishness. How they lived as old as they did he would never understand. He closed his eyes tightly against the images that flooded his memories, the harsh abuse and the cruelty he had suffered at the hands of Melek and his men. All men couldn't possibly be like the men of Dorolyn. He knew that. And this one was wounded, he reminded himself, so he would be no threat. Still, the feelings of distrust and disdain would not easily be chased away. He had just turned his eyes back out into the quiet dark night when a sound touched his ears. Quickly and quietly he crept back into the camp. Rounding the fire, he knelt down next to the young man. The ranger's eyes were moving underneath his eyelids, and his breathing was irregular and fast. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and as Legolas reached out to touch him, he moved violently in his sleep, jerking back and reaching towards his empty scabbard. His eyes flew open, unseeing, caught in his dreams, and in his native language he cried out for help, speaking quickly in Elvish, begging his tormentors to leave him alone. The abrupt response startled Legolas, and he lost his balance, catching himself with one hand as he realized that the man was speaking in the Grey tongue. And there was something about the young man's eyes that Legolas hadn't noticed before, something familiar. When he cried out again for help in Elvish, Legolas regained his balance and reached out towards him. He gently took the ranger's shoulders in his hands and spoke softly to him, trying to press him back down and calm him. He had switched from speaking common and was speaking to the boy in the high tongue. It had a calming effect on Aragorn, and he stopped fighting. In his fever-induced nightmare he heard the words his own father had spoken many times to him. "It is all right. You are safe. Calm down now. It's okay. I'm here." "Elrond?" Aragorn whispered the name as he released his grip on Legolas's arms and let the elf press him gently back down. Legolas held the man for a few seconds more as his own shock wore off. His mind spun crazily as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The ranger spoke Elvish. That in itself was not uncommon among rangers, but this one spoke it as if he were born to it. And when Legolas had spoken to him, the words had calmed him immediately, and he had called for Elrond. Had he thought Legolas was Elrond? And why would the man speak the Lord of Rivendell's name like this one had? Legolas reached out a slender hand and brushed the ranger's hair away from his face. He placed a palm on the man's forehead, easily feeling the unnatural heat there. His wounds were infected. He was feverish. It was going to be a long night, and if this one was going to make it, Legolas needed to work fast. Deep in his heart he feared losing the young man, a feeling that he found quite foreign. He laid aside his fears and thoughts for the moment, and removing the small bag of herbs from his pack, he concentrated on the infection spreading through Aragorn's body. He needed to stop the fever, and soon. Chapter 3. Turning Points. Aragorn? Someone called his name. He tried to wake up, but his body was weighted down and his eyes wouldn't open. Estelle? Father? He moved anxiously, trying to free himself from his bonds. Where was he? Elrond? He frowned as he fought his own body. No, do not fight it. Cool hands slid along his face and held him still. It is Legolas. You are still here in the woods. Just listen to my voice and wake up slowly. I drugged you last night. You were feverish. Aragorn swallowed hard. His throat was dry. Nothing this person said was making any sense. Unconsciously he switched to Elvish. Let me go. Legolas sighed and tucked the edges of his cloak back around the ranger's body. He had used it to cover the man last night after bringing his fever down. An arrow tip had wedged itself near the bone in his thigh, and Legolas had missed it the first time when he had dressed the wound. During the night the tip had infected the wound and set the man perilously close to death's door. It had been a long night, and a few times the elf thought he was going to lose the young man. It had been during one of Aragorn's feverish nightmares that Legolas had learned the ranger's true identity. The man had called out for his father, claiming the sons of Elrond were his brothers. He argued with some unknown assailant that his heritage was not in question, and he was the Elven King's own. It had taken all the elf's strength to restrain the wounded man. At that point Legolas had opted to drug him in order to calm him down so that he could more easily see to the leg and remove the arrow tip. "Who are you?" Aragorn's words were slightly slurred as he settled down and concentrated on the voice that spoke to him. Legolas continued to speak in Elvish. It seemed to get through to the man easier in his current state of mind. Carefully, he moved aside the cloak and inspected the nasty gash running the length of Aragorn's thigh. It looked somewhat better in the pre-dawn light, but it was still red and hot to the touch. "I am Legolas. I am the one who rescued you last night." There was no response from the prone man, and Legolas looked up from his task to watch the still face. "Aragorn? You are the elf from last night?" Memory caught up with him slowly, as the fog cleared from his mind. "Yes? I did not mean to insult you. I vaguely remember that I seemed to have." Dark silver eyes opened slowly and fixed on the elf's grey ones. "I am sorry." Legolas looked down to the bandage in his hands and gently reapplied it to the wound. "You did not. It is I who owe you the apology. I mistook you for simply another man." "Any certain man?" Aragorn carefully tried to sit up, watching his companion intently. Not meeting his gaze, Legolas moved quickly to his side and helped him up, leaning him against the nearby tree. No one in particular. "Just men?" When his question broke no response, he continued, pressing. "You have been mistreated by men, then, I assume?" "Your curiosity is misplaced." The elf moved silently to tend the dwindling fire. "You should save your strength." Aragorn smiled in spite of the situation. He loved a challenge, and this elf held his interest. He was sure the lithe body was more than its seemingly 20 years. If he had to guess, he would have measured this one to be well over 1,000 years old. Something in the elf's graceful quietness had tipped off the ranger. There was a depth to this one's soul that only came with age. Although it was always hard to guess the ages of elves, it had been a game he had readily played all his younger years with his elven brothers. He'd gotten rather good at it, so he decided to play with this elf, too. "I'd say you were well over 1,000 years old." His voice was soft and barely above a whisper, but he knew his companion could hear him easily. "Even though you look like you could be my age. Your eyes are gray, but there is blue in them. You are not from Rivendell. I would guess Mirkwood by your clothing, and you carry yourself like royalty, although all elves have that haughty gait when they want to." The last statement was meant as a barb, a taunt that usually fell from the mouths of men, and it struck its target well. Legolas's head shot up, and his eyes were hard and fierce as he pinned Aragorn with a withering glance. But the glare only caused the man to laugh, much to Legolas's surprise. "Peace, my friend. It was only a jest, my lord." Aragorn's response startled Legolas. Only elves spoke to each other like that. Men never called an elf lord. And for the first time the elven prince realized that the ranger had been teasing him. Aragorn saw the change in his companion and smiled. "So, do you want me to keep guessing, or will you tell me yourself who you are?" He waited for a heartbeat, and then continued. "And why, my friend, do you hate men so much?" Legolas dropped his gaze back to the forest floor as memories haunted him, and he warred within himself whether to trust this man. "You do not have to," Aragorn spoke softly. The words came out in common, and he immediately switched to Elvish. "I'm sorry. I did not mean to press you. I'm indebted to you. You saved my life. I only wanted to know whom I owe my life to." The elf swallowed hard, pretending to keep his hands busy with something as he tried to come to terms with the surfacing emotions inside of him.